Welcome back to Creative Excuses and to my first Baldur's Gate 3 video. Normally, I make Elder Scrolls Online builds and gameplay videos and a RuneScape 3 Ultimate Iron Man series on the side. But today, we are doing something a little different. Today, we are talking about a really fun early game build for Baldur's Gate 3 with a fun playstyle in combat and an interesting build path throughout the game. If you're new around here, the way that I like to make build videos on other games is to talk about problems and solutions. It's a fun way to talk about why a build works and to talk about a game's mechanics. That's my plan here, so let's jump into it. If you just want the build, skip to that chapter in the video below. Baldur's Gate 3's turn-based combat system is based on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, which I have never played. I've never done anything with D&D before this game, and I don't think that I'll play anytime soon, if ever. However, the result of being based on D&D is that your options in combat are all determined by a concept called the action economy. This is a phrase that basically describes what a player or character can do in a single turn. I think this is a term mostly used for D&D, but it can easily be applied to board games and card games as well. In a classic game like Settlers of Catan, there are only so many actions that you can take in a turn. You can trade players, trade the bank, play development cards, or build things. That's it. Each of those have specific variants of those actions, but you can do all of them in one turn as long as you have the resources to do so. In a game like Uno, though, your action economy consists of drawing a card and discarding a card, sometimes with a special effect. That's pretty much it. In Baldur's Gate 3, your action economy generally has 3 different resources you can spend each turn. A movement resource, which is just how far you can move, and sometimes how you move to a new spot. An action, which can be something like a range of different attacks or spells, utility or otherwise. And a bonus action, which is usually like a miniature action, but can also be a lot of different things like casting a healing spell, drinking a potion, applying a poison, jumping, which actually costs both an action and movement, etc. There's a lot of options. One very effective way to build out a character is to try and maximize your action economy. The more power you can shove into each of your resources in your action economy, the more you can accomplish in a single turn to make the fights go your way. For example, as a cleric, you can cast something on yourself like Spirit Guardians one turn, which is a concentration spell. That's another kind of resource we can talk about another time. But this spell, Spirit Guardians, places an area of damage centered on your character that you can move around the battlefield using your movement. As you move, the spell goes with you. This means by using one action in one turn, you have made your movement resource into a damaging ability on subsequent turns. For future turns, your action is now freed up to heal or to do more damage, while your movement has become an attack. Another way to maximize your action economy is the popular spell Haste, which, while active, gives the person benefiting from the spell an entire additional action. This is an exceptionally powerful concentration spell, as it means you can cast 2 spells that aren't concentration in one turn. Sometimes 3 on some classes. It means you can get up to 6 attacks from a level 11 fighter with no other action economy shenanigans. It is probably the most powerful or second most powerful concentration spell in the game. But neither of these examples are what I want to talk about here. The second problem I want to talk about is twofold. Build videos for Baldur's Gate 3 focus quite heavily on the fun and crazy things that you can do in the late game, and builds that I've seen that push the action economy to the limits are generally late game builds. For me, that's a problem, because by the time I'm in Act 3, the game basically feels over and I'm already starting to think about my next playthrough, my next character, and my next build. So the thinking for this video is that I want to make a fun, powerful, action economy exploiting build that is available while still in Act 1, and without any fancy items, potions, or scrolls required. There is no required hasting here, but you can get potions of speed early on that will just make you stronger. For the general build though, we are going to rely on maximizing our bonus action. Now, let's really jump into the build and see how it makes the most out of the action economy in Baldur's Gate 3, Act 1. This build comes in a lot of flavors. An all-martial melee-focused build, an all-martial ranged-focused build, a spellblade, or an arcane crossbow user. Which flavor you choose comes down to your preferred weapon choices and if you want to use magic in the build. I am going to show you the Spellblade because that is what I want to play in this third full playthrough of the game. But this is very easy to adapt for the other flavors, and I think you can figure it out. If you want a little help though, feel free to drop a comment and I will almost certainly respond. I am known to write books in my comment sections. So here we go. This is Charlie the Spellblade. At character creation, I'm going to pick two key things: race and class. Obviously, for most builds, the race does not matter that much, mostly being a role play flavor thing. But in my case, I want access to the Spellblade playstyle from level 1, so I actually only have 3 race options: High Elf, Asmodeus Tiefling, and Half High Elf. These are the only races that get an offensive cantrip as part of their racial features. If you are playing an all-martial version of this build, you can probably pick whatever race suits you. Of these 3 races that I get to choose from, the Half High Elf and High Elf are the clear choices unless you want to be throwing a small ball of fire directly from your hand with the Tiefling. It does sound cool honestly, but I really want to play a Spellblade and not the Arcane Crossbow user. So I'm going to choose a High Elf. As a High Elf, Charlie gets to pick a cantrip from the Wizard Spellbook, which is basically all of the offensive cantrips. I will be picking Shocking Grasp here because it will not get disadvantage in melee distance, it will have advantage on melee armored enemies, and when it hits, it is actually a free disengage, preventing one enemy from hitting you with an opportunity attack if you run away after shocking them. It is a fantastic spell. Oh, and if you set it up, you can do double the damage of this cantrip by making targets wet first. It's awesome, it really is. For the class, we are going to pick the Fighter for one simple reason. We want a fighting style. This fighting style and cantrip combination forms the core of the entire playstyle and is absolutely essential. We want to pick the 2-weapon fighting style. This fighting style adds your full damage bonus to your offhand attacks with a weapon. Essentially, we are making ourselves ambidextrous. While this sounds kind of nifty, this is actually massive for exploiting the action economy because our offhand attacks do not cost an action like our main hand attacks. Offhand attacks cost a bonus action instead. Without this fighting style, a bonus action offhand attack, it still hits, but it hits pretty low. But with this fighting style, our bonus action attack now has the same value as our action used on an attack. We essentially have 2 actions per turn now when we use our bonus on an offhand attack. See, lefties do have more fun. But that isn't all. At level 1, with this High Elf Fighter combination, we can now Shocking Grasp and offhand attack every single turn. We are a Spellblade at level 1 because our cantrip costs an action, and we can still attack with our offhand using the bonus action. But that still isn't all. Because we've made our bonus action more valuable, we can now do things like dash and attack on the same turn, which is usually reserved for level 2 and above rogues who can dash as a bonus action and attack with their action. Essentially, at level 1, we already have the ability to attack twice. That's a feature usually reserved for level 5 martial classes and above. We can use a cantrip or a spell plus a bonus action attack, which is a feature reserved for level 7 Eldritch Knight fighters, or we can dash and attack in the same turn, which is a feature reserved for rogues. This is all at level 1. This is a level 1, very versatile powerhouse, and it's only going to get better and more versatile from there. From levels 2 through 4, we are going to immediately multi-class into 3 levels of rogue and take the thief subclass. This is where the build really takes off. With the thief subclass, you now receive a second bonus action, meaning we can do things like dash 3 times in 1 turn, we can attack with a spell and 2 weapon attacks thanks to our 2-weapon fighting style and access to a cantrip. We can hide, sneak attack, and full power offhand attack in 1 turn. We can do so many things, it's ridiculous. All of this before level 5. Our action economy is just honestly a bit ridiculous, with basically the power of 3 full actions per turn. And that's the whole build, or at least that's the core gameplay style. From there, you can choose to multi-class more, or you can commit to the fighter for extra melee and ranged attacks and action surge, or you can commit to the rogue class for bigger sneak attacks, which will maximize your action economy in different ways. For my Spellblade though, I will actually be taking 8 levels of Evocation Wizard with a bunch of damage and utility spells, all the way up to level 4 spell slots, so that I can throw a fireball at my feet when I want to clear a room, and then I still have 2 attacks in the same turn, or I can disengage, dash, or whatever else I need to do. It's going to be awesome. One fun thing to note is that if you use finesse weapons here, you will end up with a better Eldritch Knight and better Arcane Trickster Rogue in just one build, because you'll have spell slots all the way up to level 4, you'll have the ability to learn spells from scrolls, you'll have the ability to cast a spell and strike with 2 weapon attacks in one turn, and so much more. You can be sneaky to get your sneak attacks, you can cast greater invisibility, fly, or haste, you can sneak and drop a fireball in the middle of enemies. There's so much versatility with this build that it's just absurd. For itemization on the Spellblade, the choices are all yours as you play through your story. Items in this game to me are much more about the story than the power, as you can lock yourself out of items very easily by making certain choices of when and how you do certain activities. This means you may not have the items that I do, and vice versa. While I could use mods to give myself whatever I want, that isn't why I'm playing the game. I like the limitations of making choices in the story and how that can impact the build overall. However, as a recommendation, I would suggest looking for items that benefit an alternating spell and weapon attack playstyle. On my second playthrough, I actually saw a ton of these items that just weren't very useful on my trickster halberd swinging warlock. But on my third playthrough, I definitely want to find and use as many of these kinds of items as possible. I think there's a lot. Now, of course, there is so much more that goes into a build like this working. I didn't talk about ability scores, but they're on the screen now. I didn't talk about feat choices or the specific leveling and respecking path that I will actually be taking in order to make this build strong and enjoyable from level 1 all the way through to the spoilers. For all of those details, check out the video description where there is a written guide to my starting ability scores and why I chose them, as well as my planned feats that may change as I actually play the character through to the end game. If you enjoyed this video, found it helpful, and want to see more like it, like the video, subscribe, and comment to feed me dopamine and encourage me to make more Baldur's Gate 3 videos. Until then, I'll see you all in the next excuse.